Welcome to the Human Experience Podcast, the only podcast designed to fuse your left and right brain hemispheres and feed it the most entertaining and mentally engaging topics on the planet. As we approach our ascent, please make sure your frontal, temporal and occipital lobes are in their full upright position. As you take your seat of consciousness, relax your senses and allow us to take you on a journey. We are the Intimate Strangers. Thank you for listening.
What's up, folks? This is our episode with Mr. Will Johnson. He has written a book called Breathing Through the Whole Body. He is a Princeton graduate, highly educated. He is the founder of the Institute for Embodiment Training. In this episode, we cover the various benefits to using meditation in our daily lives. We cover some of the aspects of meditation you may not think about. Overall, a very good episode. Please purchase a copy of Mr. Johnson's book. A link to that is below. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at TheHumanXP. And thank you guys so much for listening. The human experience is balancing mind and body. My guest tonight is Mr. Will Johnson. Will, my good sir, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Xavier. Good to be here.
So I find your work very intriguing. I know that you went to Princeton but why don't you tell our audience, how did you get into this? What is your background, please?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. The first thing to say right from the beginning, I'm not a body person by birth. I came to all of this through getting in touch with the fact of how out of touch I was with my feeling presence, with experience. So in my early 20s, I went to university. I majored in art history. I wrote some art criticism in New York. There wasn't a lot of life in that. I ended up in California. And one of the things that I knew that I needed to do is get back in touch with my body. So I started doing different kinds of Western body therapies. And then I was led to take what I was experiencing from what I was getting from those therapies into the Buddhist arena, in a sense applying the just basic principles of body to the process of sitting meditation. So that in a nutshell is kind of what the journey has been, or how it started out, certainly.
Was there a point in which you thought, oh, okay, well, this is the direction that I want to go with my life, or any kind of some event that led you towards this, or did you always just kind of feel a connection to these Eastern philosophies? How did you make that decision to write about this?
Yeah. What I would have to say, I'd have to go back to my early childhood. I did have experiences. I wrote about these experiences in a book called The Selfish and the Sacred Mountain, where from an early age, I had what essentially are fairly mystical experiences. I would go to bed at night, and I'd go through a very, very physical process of dissolving. And by the time I became aware of what was going on, it felt like I was about as big as the universe. You know what? It was just a childhood experience. I had it a lot, but I parked it. When I became older, I got much more into academics. I forgot about all this until it never obviously let go, because even in university I started reading Eastern religions. I started experimenting with different kinds of Buddhist practices. And suddenly I started rekindling some of those earlier experiences. Now, again, for me, the whole avenue in was through the body. As I said, I was so out of touch with it that actually kindling an awareness of sensation, of physical presence, was, quite radical for me. So when, this started happening, to put those two strands together, the somatic background with the very, very traditional dharma, it was just simply a natural fit. And it came with a feeling of rightness that I knew this is what I had to keep exploring.
I really like that through your work, you are reconnecting the body. I think that most people may think that meditation is a mind-based activity. Like, I'm quieting my thoughts. I'm not really, usually when I think about meditation, I'm not really thinking about my posture I don't initially think, okay, well, I should focus on my posture. It's more of, I feel like it should be more of a mental thing. But your work kind of focuses on how to bring the body back into this process, this meditative process. So, how important would you say that this is?
Critical. But, again, I'm expressing my bias, but what I'm getting at is that, meditation is often presented as, just as you're suggesting, an exercise or activity that we engage through our minds. And in truth, the profound practice of putting yourself into a sitting posture and staying in that posture for hours, long days even, opening to breath, opening to body, it is extraordinarily transformational. However, if we don't have some of just the most basic understanding of how to sit in such a way that we're not bracing ourselves, we're not, we're tensing, we're not fighting the process, but can actually relax into it. It makes an extraordinary amount of difference. Mostly what I've seen when I sit in front of a hall of sitting meditators, most everybody is sitting very rigid, very still, hanging on for dear life. And the common report for those people who are courageous enough to enter into long retreat, a week, 10 days, a month, that kind of thing, that a lot of the experience is frankly awful, because there's so much pain that comes up, through the way they're sitting. So if we can apply some basic and simple principles to what I call the posture of meditation, then meditation has no choice but to begin. That process opens, and we're swept along for the ride.
I feel like my friends are heavy meditators. Like, they're the type of people who are just like, oh, I need to go meditate, and it's just a part of their lives, and it's integral to what they're doing. So, how in breathing through the whole body, you talk about finding a quiet place. In every day, I think I feel like I'm surrounded by computers. My cell phone is always on me. How important is it to find this quiet place to go into?
It really depends ultimately what people want, and what people want from exposing themselves to, I guess, what you'd call a spiritual process. Look, we can, work within the crazy city life and just stay very, very mindful and make our way through life in a very unquiet place. That to me is important, and yet, I often say this, that the Dharma, the Buddhist teachings, it's not fast food therapy. That if people truly want the quality of transformation that the Buddha would imply as both our birthright and our destiny, then it's really, really helpful to remove ourselves at times from the hustle and bustle, from the noise, to go into retreat. Now, as important as long retreat is, and I do feel this is a very, very important part of this process of transformation for people who are sincere about wanting to experience this, be it 7 days, 10 days, 21 days, whatever. As important as it is to do that, what we're also then going to want to do at the conclusion of that retreat, where we've left the noise, is to go back into our life and just simply set up a daily practice. And it might just simply be a quiet, quote unquote, corner in our home where our children know not to bother us, where we've left our devices out of the room, so we're not going to be checking them constantly, and do practices every day. My preference is to get up in the morning. If you have a job, obviously, you get up very early in the morning, and you do practices. Do them for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, however long you can take. But this, in a sense, is kind of the formula for people who want to enter into this.
Would you say that consistency is the most important when practicing meditation?
It's certainly important in the beginning, so that you establish it becomes more second nature, that you get up in the morning and you're going to do sitting practices, you're going to do moving practices, then you're going to go out in your life and spend your day. But this is not something, unfortunately, that it works well to dabble with. That either you want to start playing. If you start playing with this stuff, you want to go all the way. Trungpa Rinpoche, very, very wonderful Tibetan teacher. One of the early Tibetan teachers that came over here and really understood the West. He had a saying once. He said, "Oh, the spiritual path. Oh, better not go anywhere near it. Oh, you've already started. Better go all the way." And it is. It's like that. So certainly, consistency is important. I'll share that. For me at this point, if I miss morning practice, I don't do so well. During the rest of the day, it's that clear for me how much I do need this.
It is a part of your regular everyday routine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. And Xavier, I don't know if I consider myself a particularly spiritual person or a noble person or whatever, but I do these practices because they work and they help get me back in touch with that, core dimension that simply feels right. And this, of course, is what people like the Buddha or Sufi teachers like Rumi speak of as when we dissolve back into this fundamental place of essential nature. That's when life starts working, or that's when we feel like, okay, this insanity, this craziness that we call life, yeah, this is a good wave and I can ride it. Otherwise, for me, if I miss a lot of practice over a number of days for whatever reasons, right, that when I get back to it, it feels more like I've drowned than I've been riding that wave. So yeah, consistency is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, I mean, there was in your book that you helped write, The Forbidden Rumi.
Yes.
You looked at Rumi's most heretical work and you present it for the first time in English. Why did you feel like you needed to do that?
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. How that all came about is that in my early 20s, I literally stumbled upon this very, very potent gazing practice where two people will sit down across from each other. It's eye gazing. Look into each other's eyes, hold the gaze, start relaxing and letting go and allowing whatever wants to happen. There's all sorts of different surges that happen in bodily energy, different states of mind come up. The visual field can go very unusual, almost hallucinatory, but it is a very, very powerful practice. Now, later on in my life, I came to understand that was the practice that the 13th century mystic, poet, and originator of the dance of the whirling dervish, Rumi, was doing in intensive retreat with his great friend Sham. So I got into Rumi, that way, and then through that met this fellow Nevid Ergin. Nevid is in his mid-80s. If anybody's doorstep is the one that we can go to and say, hey, it's because of you that Rumi came to the West, it really is Nevid. He took on the job of translating the whole of Rumi's spontaneously uttered poems into English, and Nevid and I met after I wrote about the gazing practice, And I've gone on and, helped him with, some more of the translation books. Now, Rumi is extraordinarily body-oriented. And what gets very interesting, this is another, fun story to share, with your listeners. Rumi, his family fled Afghanistan. And it was an unsafe place to be in. They ended up in Konya, Turkey. Konya was one of those places that everybody got along. There were Christians, there were Jews, there were Muslims. Everybody got along, and it sounds like they not only got along but supported one another. At Rumi's funeral, there were his Islamic students, but there was a huge Christian community and a huge Jewish community, and they were asked, "What are you doing here?" And the Christians would say, "When we listened to your master speak, we understood the words of Jesus." The Jews would say, "When we hear his sermons, we know what Moses wants to do." Now, in my case, I honestly feel it was through my exposure to Rumi that I came to understand what the breathing practices of the Buddhists were all about, and especially the practice that culminates, the instructions that culminate in, as you breathe in through the whole body, and as you breathe out through the whole body. Rumi's practices are deeply body-oriented. There was gazing. There was obviously the dervish dancing, eating very, very lightly. And Rumi was a great breather. There's so much in his work that's about breath and about breathing. One wonderful poem of Rumi says that bringing breath to life is the essence of every religion and the cure for every illness. Let every breath you take cleanse the soul of its grief and pain so it can continue to burn brightly inside you. And there was something about that really, really helped me get the dynamism, the coming to life, the really bringing to life, not just an objective observation, a true bringing to life of, essential nature through breath. So, Rumi is, definitely a huge supporter for me of mine in this practice, in this Buddhist practice.
Yeah, so when let's rewind a bit and go back to what you just mentioned about breathing through the whole body. What does that even mean?
Yeah, well, it is. It's a very, very interesting question. What could that, possibly mean? That statement is the culminating instruction on breathing through one of the most seminal Buddhist texts, whose words are ascribed to the historical Buddha, himself. It starts off with observation, which is what most of the Buddhist world is involved in, and simple observation, mindfulness, bringing what we ordinarily aren't aware of to awareness is so very important. But the instructions do not stop there. They culminate in this statement of breathing through the whole body. Now, every ninth grader who's taken human anatomy now knows that you don't breathe through the whole body. We breathe through our nose and mouth. Oxygen goes in, it goes into the lungs. There's this exchange into the blood. It fuels the cells. There's the expelling of the gaseous waste products. What is helpful to remind ourselves of is that knowledge is frankly very recently acquired knowledge. And I should be better on the dates. I don't know, is it 17th century or 18th century where we get people like Lavoisier and Priestley who finally discover through, the fledgling science of chemistry what breath is actually about. But for millennia, nobody would have said that what we're doing when we're breathing is we're taking in oxygen and expelling, gaseous waste. Now, what gets interesting about this? Well, a couple of things. What most Westerners believed from the time of the early Greeks who were contemporaneous with the Buddha was that we breathe to cool the heat of the heart. And this goes all the way through, Western history, even through, Leonardo. And it's fascinating because if you think about that, there's you can understand where that comes from. Sometimes when you're observing breath, for example, if you're observing breath entering and leaving the body at the nostrils, it feels kind of cool coming in and warmer coming out, just as though what it was doing was cooling the heat of the heart and, keeping things at, a temperate level. Now, the Buddha comes out of a Hindu background. And, within the whole, Hindu, cosmological system and their spiritual practices, we know of prana as referring not just to the breath, but to the energetic presence of the body. And for me, it's completely conceivable that the Buddha felt that as he would breathe in these ways that were so deeply and profoundly relaxed, what would start happening, he could feel the breath, in a sense, passing through, actually through transmitted motions, through the body, through the entire body, and stimulating the awareness of the shimmer, the literally sensational presence of the body. What I mean by that, sensations, they're these tiny, minute, pin-prick blips of sensation, of feeling presence. They exist everywhere on the body. They're oscillating at unimaginably rapid rates of vibratory frequency, and still we can feel it. We can feel it as this current, this shimmer. And there's something about this practice of breathing through the whole body that stimulates the awareness of that through the entire body. So, that's one of the things that I think is going on here.
So is it more of an awareness that you are just aware of your whole body as well as breathing? Or, I'm confused.
Awareness is the first part of it, but ultimately awareness alone is not enough. What has to happen is a radical, frankly, kind of relaxation or letting go through the whole body. What I'm getting at is that, look, we can move our awareness through the body, kindling the awareness of sensations, as is done in some of the very powerful Burmese forms of Theravadan practice. And, that's a very wonderful thing to do. But, ultimately, we're not only just wanting to be aware of the entire body as a unified field of tactile feeling presence. We're wanting to let go of the profound holding, tensing, bracing that we encounter when we do actually give ourselves permission to feel what's going on, or what's going on, through the body. And this again is where we get into this culmination instruction to breathe through the whole body, and very simply, and we can talk about this in more detail if you like, but very simply, to breathe through the whole body, two things are necessary. One, we have to awaken the feeling presence of the entire body. Look, most of us, live in what I call the quality of consciousness that passes as normal in the world at large. There's nothing wrong with it. It's where we live. It's just very incomplete, and it's a very disembodied consciousness where, for the most part, we are lost in thought and out of touch, oblivious with the feeling presence. So the first thing we need to do is to awaken awaken body as actual, palpable feeling presence, because how could we possibly breathe through the whole body if we're not even able to feel it? And then the second part of this, and this is arguably the most radical thing that I'm bringing to the Buddhist conversation in the cushion, is this understanding that in a completely relaxed body, and ultimately that's what we're wanting to do with these practices. We're wanting to relax so deeply that we start letting go of some of the unnecessary tensions in the body, the contractive ruts and patterns in the mind. Now, for that to happen, for that kind of extraordinary relaxation to occur, as we breathe in, it's almost like a wave moving through a body of water. Motion, transmitted motion, can start occurring through the entire body at every joint in the body. And that can go from, way down through the feet up through the top of the head. And if these kinds of altogether natural, amoeba-like, spontaneous motions aren't occurring, we are bracing ourselves, we're holding, and there's no relaxation. And when we forfeit the relaxation, we stay stuck within the dimension of the mind that the practices are trying to show us. That's only your surface. Let's go deeper. It's better down deeper.
Interesting. I mean, it's a very advanced conversation. I don't feel like this is a beginner conversation, but I'm curious to know how. I mean, do you feel like transcendental meditation is somehow more beneficial? Or, I mean, I know your work is more about breath work, and it seems like, I mean, Time magazine did a piece on just meditation. It's interesting how it's kind of permeating into Western culture.
Yeah, very much so.
But when I hear about it, I don't really hear about breath work. Again, I usually hear about just, TM or just kind of meditating. I mean, so how important is posture, and would you say that your work is more of a breath meditation, or is it, and what is it?
Yeah, well, it's definitely breath and body, but let me backtrack. It really depends, what you're doing. If you're doing something like TM or some of the Vedic meditations, very traditional, here in the West, 20 minutes in the morning, 20 minutes in the afternoon. Honestly, I don't think for that short period of time, posture is that critical. And even just, sitting back in a comfortable chair is absolutely fine. It's important to remember that this whole wave of information and instruction that's coming from India, from Asia, from, some of the Indian circles, some of the Buddhist circles, it's really, really new over here in the West, and is definitely starting to make inroads primarily through the mindfulness movement, and that would be, observing breath. What I'm interested in is people exploring the upright sitting posture. So it's not just breath, it's breath and body. And what I'm getting at is that this upright sitting posture, whether you're sitting cross-legged on a mat on the floor with your buttocks raised a little higher, or on a kneeling bench, or in a chair, if you enter into this posture and, frankly, go into retreat where, perhaps you're exploring sitting practices for anywhere from, 8 to 12 hours a day. That's what I'm primarily interested in, because that mudra, if you want to call it that, of this sitting posture, to the degree that we are playing with upright balance, okay, that we're so that the body can deeply relax and we're not bracing, that opens up or initiates a very, very deeply profound process of not just becoming more aware, not just of feeling better, but of actually transforming what you experience yourself to be. Now that's the culmination of the the Buddhist path. And as you said, that this probably isn't necessarily that basic an understanding in the retreats that I teach. I get some people who they're just in a sense starting out, and they've perhaps heard what I'm doing, and they perhaps have heard that maybe let's start out with these instructions because they're going to form, a base of support that's really going to help you go deep in your practice. Mostly what I get are, what we refer to as the old Buddhist dogs, men and women who've been really, really engaged in very serious practice for sometimes for decades. And, it's interesting, Xavier, often with them, what I get, and I'm thinking of a woman in particular at a retreat that I taught in Santa Fe, last spring. She'd been doing Zen practices for 30 years. And at the end of the retreat, she simply broke down. And her expression was, why why wasn't this taught to me, 30 years ago? In some ways what those are the people that I'm, primarily directing this to, people that really, really, really want to go to the depths of what's in the very center of their body and mind, because we just have perhaps some inkling, or maybe it's blind luck, or who knows, that we're on this path, that we know that there's something extraordinary in the very center of our centers, and is worth doing what we need to do to access.
What would you say to someone who has never meditated before and perhaps is suffering from stress, anxiety? I mean, how would you get this person to sit down and meditate?
I think that the basic mindfulness movement is probably going to be where most every Westerner is going to and should probably start. We can start calming our mind, relaxing the body. The benefits of that are now, quite well documented. What may come out of that for some people is that we realize, hey, this, calming of the body and mind is great, but I'm realizing there's something more that this is exposing me to. At that point, people want to perhaps get more serious, enter into a retreat situation. There's so many schools and teachers out there. I would love to see people be able to go into sitting retreat where there's some instruction on how to sit comfortably, so you're not bracing and in agony through the long hours of retreat. But basically, that'll probably be the progression for most of us here in the West as the Dharma is coming to our shores.
So I guess I'll just go back to my previous statement. I mean, the Institute for Embodiment Training, you guys offer some workshops. I mean, I'm looking at the website here right now, and it looks pretty cool. I kind of want to come and hang out with you guys.
Over the years, I've done a fair bit of, mostly traveling and teaching. Yes, we do some things here. The Institute for Embodiment Training is a lovely phrase for my wife's and my home. We do gatherings here. Occasionally they're residential gatherings. I would say mostly, though, at this point in my life, I respond more to invitations to come and teach. And the other thing I'll just leave you with, because this is what our vision is right now, we're actually in the process of moving. Our home is for sale. Our destination is Costa Rica. We're better to open into one's nature than in big nature. And what we're wanting to do there is to establish a small retreat cottage on our property where people can come down and enter into intensive self-retreat, maybe for up to 21 days, for really, really, working with these practices. Maybe for an hour every morning, there will be instruction. Every other afternoon. Part of my background with the somatics is that I was an early student of Ida Rolf's, and I bring Rolfers into the retreats that I teach to help supporting finding that posture of meditation. Maybe every second or third day in the afternoon, I'll do a hands-on session with the people. My wife is a very, very gifted dream worker. Dreams get wildly sparked and kindled during retreat. Every other afternoon she can work with those people. But that's the next phase of the Institute for Embodiment Training, what we'll be doing.
Very interesting, sir. Well, Will, I really appreciate your time. Is there a website where people can go to find your work?
Yes, the website is embodiment.net. Embodiment is EMBODIMENT.net, and you find the different practices that we explore. There's always a schedule of upcoming events or retreats. It's a nice little website.
Thank you, sir. This is The Human Experience. My name is Xavier, and we are going to get out of here. Thank you guys so much for listening.